Hi, this is Roger. Thanks for dropping by. Been asked by quite a few people over a period of time about my Pinguiculas, so I'm going to set them all up together and have a chat about those in this video. And yeah, something different. So let's have a look at the Pinguiculas then, Pings for short. You have to bear in mind that these grow in many parts of the world, but these ones that I've got are endearingly known as Mexican Pinguiculas. That doesn't mean they all come from Mexico, it's just a nickname, but it epitomizes types of Pinguiculas. Quite a few come from the upper part of the South America, and quite a few come from around the Caribbean basin and onto the mainland southern states and the Central America parts. And all of those come into a similar category as far as what they look like and their care, basically. Their care determined by their climate. Now these have a funny thing that they can do. Some of these can have what is effectively a dormancy period, and they change their leaves during that period, and their leaf type can change quite dramatically. That happens in lower temperatures, so if they don't get the lower temperatures, they don't go into that dormant state. They stay growing, albeit slower for me, because obviously it is a bit cooler in the winter, but not cool enough to drive them into total dormancy, so I don't get that change on mine. What I've actually got are three the same, and they came from Oliver. This over here was the first plant Oliver gave me, and it grew to an enormous size with many plantlets growing off of it. So I actually took it out of its pot and split it and gave some pieces to somebody else. And these were some small plants that I potted up to grow on. These two were also given to me by Oliver as single plants. They're growing on nicely. They bloom every now and again. They are pretty little flowers. Most of the flowers go through the whites and pinks and purples, but you do get some other colours in amongst them. This is the only other one that's in flower at the moment, and that's a lovely delicate lilac colour, I would call that. The other three that I've got over here with the fatter leaves, I had to take a trip out to the Hampshire Carnivorous Plants place, which was a half a day out for me. Fair old drive and a look round their site, but the time of year I went, all of their absolutely stunning and spectacular carnivorous plants were looking really poor because they were going over for the winter, so it looked a bit of a mess. But what I went there for was peat. And the reason I needed the coarse peat was for my deces. That's quite important for deces. And quite honestly, it's quite important for these too, so it will serve a dual purpose. Now, I've never really repotted any of these, so I haven't had to worry about what they're growing in. They're growing in what they came in, but basically they need something that drains fast, and you do seriously need to avoid any form of sort of compost that you buy to use around your garden and with your house plants and everything, because they've got nutrients in, and that'll knock these plants over faster than anything. These need virtually no nutrients at all. They live on next to nothing. At the end of the day, they are carnivorous plants, and they get some of their nutrients from feeding off of insects. But a potting mix for these is something like horticultural sand and peat, or sand perlite and peat, or some grit and some peat and some sand. Anything where you pour the water in and it almost goes straight through but does retain some moisture. You need something along those lines. The three that I got when I was at the Carnivorous Plant Centre, which was not what I went there for, but when I saw they had some, I thought I'd get some. This one's a Tina cross. This one's called Cherry Blossom. These are all hybrids, and this is a Wesser cross. This one is bulking up quite nicely. This is growing quite a few plantlets, so it's growing into quite a reasonable plant. And I can't remember specifically, but I believe these two have yet to bloom. So I'm looking forward to what they come out like. And this is an odd one because this one's called Cherry Blossom. And for some strange reason I was expecting it to be red, and it's not. So a little disappointed, but nonetheless it's still an attractive flower. So these grow quite well in my grow room. They quite like the humidity, but they can do without it. Some of these in the wild actually grow in quite arid conditions. So they are capable of tolerating low humidity, but they seem to grow pretty well in here. They like bright light. I'm not so sure they would take direct sun in here, but they are found in places where they're growing in direct sun, or at least sun for part of the day, so they can take it. But I would imagine in the UK, if I was to put these outside, they'd have to be acclimatised incredibly carefully and not just suddenly stuck in full sun. They'd probably burn them and dry them up too much as well. So they don't take much care. I water mine in the trays, and most of the time it's just pure RO water, and I just pour it in the tray and let the pot soak it up. So I don't pour water in the top of the pots. They can have a bit of rot near the base of the plant if they get too soggy, so a bit of care. An ideal sort of circumstances might be that if you repotted them, to sort of top dress the pots with some grit, just to keep that moisture away from the base. They're very shallow rooted, and quite honestly the large plant that's been split up, that actually pushed itself out of the pot. It grew so many leaves that it lifted itself and ended up with the roots just sitting on the surface, which was really, at that point, it did actually fall out of the pot, which was what made me decide to split it up and repot some of the plants. So they're easy to look after. They are carnivorous, but they work in, they don't have any traps or anything like that. They produce a slimy mucus on the leaves, which if you touch it, you will get it on your hands. It is quite slippery and slimy, and with the tiny little hairs, the combination allow the smallest insects to stick, and then they dissolve them and eat them, basically. Larger insects have got the strength to pull away, so you know, it's only the tiny. And what these catch in here are the fungus gnats, those little black annoying flies that are always in your face, and they do quite a good job. You can see the flies sticking to the leaves, yeah, so they do quite a good job. And quite honestly, since these got going this spring, I just don't get the fungus gnats in here. The Pinguiculas eat them, and they attract them too. It's not just that if the fly happens to pass by, those type of flies are attracted by the colour, the yellowy green. So it does pull them in and keep them away from me, which is good. I don't think they do the orchids any harm, but they're just annoying, and I'd rather they weren't around. Because occasionally one will get in through the door into the lounge, and if you're sitting watching the telly or on the computer, there's always one like between you and the screen that you can never get. So they are annoying. So anyway, they don't need a lot of care. I let mine get not dry but quite dry before I water them, and you can always do the finger test. You know, just put your finger on that is moist and heavy. So I tend to use the plant pot weight. If a plant feels quite heavy, it's obviously still got quite a bit of moisture. But if in doubt, you can always just sort of lift the leaves and touch the top of the compost. And if that feels quite damp, it's got more than enough water in there. So I usually wait till the top's starting to get a bit dry and the pot starts to feel light. And then I just pour some more water in. And occasionally they get the absolute weakest level of feed added to the water, and I'm really talking about a TDS of like 20 or 30, next to nothing. I mean, some rainwater's already at that without adding anything to it. These do well on pure water. They don't like a lot of dissolved salts. Some say they'll tolerate it, but they do better without it. So rainwater or RO water, you know, some pure water is what does them well. And they just sit here and do their thing. And as I say, I've got two non-bloomers. These plantlets haven't bloomed yet, but they're not big enough. But when they do, they will be the same as this, because as I say, those three are all the same. These three are different, two have yet to bloom. So that's my Pinguiculas. They get dotted around the grow room at strategic points to just do their job. And I get the attractive flowers every now and again. So very easy. You know, there's nothing difficult with them. But as I said, I haven't really repotted any yet, apart from splitting that one up. And quite honestly, those pieces went straight back in the same pot. So they didn't really get repotted. They got potted into the same pot, which is not quite the same thing as using new media. But basically a peaty mix with plenty of drainage, lots of horticultural sand or grit or both, and make sure that it doesn't go all claggy and soggy. And don't get them anywhere near any type of compost that's got built-in nutrients. It's too strong, far too strong. So there we go, that's the Pinguiculas out the way for those who wanted a chat about them.